This kitchen set was a huge hit with the kids on Christmas, but also, because each object is very basic, it makes for a wonderful 3ds Max or 3D print design tutorial. In this video, we're designing the knobs for an oven or stove. First things first, we're going to set up our units. Click on Customize, Unit Setup, and we're going to work in millimeters today, but if you happen to have a bald eagle standing on your shoulder, you may want to work in decimal inches. Next up, rotation snapping. And we're going to create the bottom piece, a cylinder. Just click and drag, doesn't matter what it looks like to start with. Press F4, switch to your move tool, and center it by right-clicking on these arrows down here at the bottom that show the position. Hop over to our Modify tab, and if we want this to be 2.5 inches across, we can figure out what that is in metric simply by typing 2.5, close quote, enter, and that tells us that 2.5 inches is that many millimeters. And because that's the diameter we want, not the radius, we can just hit backspace twice, divided by 2, enter. The fact that 3ds Max not only uses real-world units as you're designing, but can auto-convert between them that easily is amazing. And we only want this to be 4.5 millimeters thick. We can always go back and edit these. Now, if your cylinder looks pretty chunky like this, you can turn up the number of sides just by typing in a new number. Anything between 64 and 180 ought to be smooth enough. If you go too smooth, your computer might chug as you get more and more complicated with the number of objects you have. Now on the top, we have another cylinder. I'm pressing Ctrl V to copy. You can also right click and choose duplicate, or clone, I mean. And we want another copy, not instance. Let's move this up 4.5 millimeters so it sits on top. And frankly, I'm just going to eyeball it until I see something that just feels right for this application. Something like that. And I want this piece to be a little bit taller, like 8 millimeters. And while I have this piece already selected, I'm going to go ahead and create the bolt hole, or the hole for the screw to go. So another right-click, clone, copy. And I'm going to go ahead and rename it to screw here. And I'm going to change the color to red so that it stands out. I'm using a 1/4 inch bolt in the one I have. In fact, I can just type in 0.125 inches and get what it should be, and build in a little bit of a tolerance in case my 3D printer over extrudes. I'm just going to up that to 3.5 millimeters. Looking at the bottom, I'm just going to move it down so that it pokes through. Then look back at the top, make it tall enough that it pokes through the top as well. And now, when we tell these purple pieces to subtract out the red for a screw hole, it'll work. But of course, we need something sticking out this way so that we know which way it's facing. We're going to use the box. Just create something there, and switch over to move. Now, I don't know how far to move it this way yet, but I do know that it needs to be 4.5 millimeters up. And we want to center it on this axis. Now, I'm actually going to have it poke down into this guy just a little bit, so that they overlap. That'll make it easier for 3ds Max to know that they're supposed to be part of the same object later on. Now this piece is 8 millimeters tall, and we're down by 0.5 millimeters here, so the height needs to be 8.5. I think this looks a little on the wide side, so we're going to shrink that down here. And I think the length is actually about perfect where it was. So through a combination of adjusting the length and moving it here on the y-axis, get it to where you like, and leave it alone. Now it's time to combine all the objects. I'm going to select everything with Ctrl A, or I could simply click and drag a selection circle. And then using the move tool, I'm going to hold shift and move it over, making another copy of everything. The reason I'm doing this is so that if I mess up when adding objects here, or if I want to go back and make changes, I have a reference point where I can go back, make another copy, and do more edits at some point in the future if I decide to use a bigger bolt or what have you. Starting with the big object on bottom, going to create, and instead of a standard object, we're making a compound object using the Pro Boolean. We want to add and start picking this guy and this one. And now we're going to subtract out the bolt hole. And just like that, we have our object. Right click, convert to editable poly. And here in this modify panel, if we want to make sure that everything is going to export correctly, we can type in STL and perform a check. This will see if anything's open or otherwise messed up that we need to fix. And we are in the clear. File, export, export. Save it as an STL file. Drag your file into Cura, make a few copies, and in about 2 hours, we'll have 4 of these things ready-made and ready to go. More 3D printing and design tutorials can be found in this playlist right over here. Until then, happy printing!